Hey. Alright, so you've likely already seen Rudra's video on this topic, and that is kind of the inspiration for this video. Rudra and Luxon both inspired this video, and this might be kind of late, but I haven't really seen anyone else talking about this specifically. Like, I've seen little conversations about it, but no like full-on videos. So I decided, why not make my own video on this topic, because it actually makes a lot of sense if you think about it. So, you know, shout outs and big ups to Rudra and Luxon for basically inspiring this video, and as well as some people in my comments on the Elma Cosmos video. So big ups to them too. But yeah, let's actually get into this. Alright, look here, look and listen. So Xenoblade 3 could be the episode 6 of Perfect Works, or the timeline of Perfect Works. Perfect Works itself is actually like the art book for Xenogears, and there's a timeline in the book showing like the timeline of Xenogears, and it's most commonly referred to as Perfect Works. So when I say Perfect Works, that's what I'm referring to. And obviously Perfect Works was only supposed to be like the story of Xenogears, and so Xenosaga and Xenoblade have basically taken their own spin on that. They're kind of like spiritual successors to it. Like, the stories of Xenosaga and Xenoblade parallel Perfect Works, considering Xenogears was supposed to be 6 games, where the Xenogears we have is part 5 of the 6-part story. So we never really got, you know, the rest of the games to flesh out that story. So for everything we know about episode 1 through 4 is in Perfect Works, like in the book. And then Xenosaga episode 1 through 3 is supposed to be episode 1 of Perfect Works, because Xenosaga was also supposed to be a 6-part series, but we only got 3 games to that. So we're not really sure what episode 2 through 4 would be for Xenosaga. But for Xenoblade, we actually have all 6 episodes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 episodes of Perfect Works. Xenoblade tells the entire story. Obviously not the original Xenogears story, but Xenoblade's version of the Perfect Works story. So, and I haven't played Xenogears at all. I know almost nothing about it, and I'm only a couple hours into Xenosaga 1, so I'm not going to be talking about Xenosaga or Gears in this video at all, except I might refer to them a little bit. But we're mainly sticking to Xenoblade because, I mean, that's kind of what the video is about, and Xenoblade 3 could be the episode 6 of Perfect Works, or the retelling of episode 6. So I just wanted to get that disclaimer out of the way before we started. But with now that is out of the way, let's actually start. This is not going to be perfect, obviously, and I'm not the most knowledgeable about the whole Perfect Works timeline, but I will explain it the best way that I can, obviously in terms of Xenoblade. And I'm most knowledgeable in Xenoblade out of Gears, Saga, and Blade, so it shouldn't be too hard to follow along with. So before episode 1, the Zohar is found in Kenya in the 21st century. And the discovery of this Zohar leads humanity to have just an exponential, massive growth in technology and development. And, you know, obviously this would lead up to episode 1, which is the Interplanetary War. Now, in terms of Xenoblade, the Interplanetary War would be the war against the Saviorite rebels above Earth. Now, we don't know exactly who the Saviorite rebels are, or if it was some kind of government fighting the Saviorite rebels, but the Saviorite rebels were trying to get the Zohar. I'm going to be calling the conduit the Zohar in this video for simplicity's sake, because the conduit basically is just the Xenoblade version of the Zohar. but the Samurai rebels were after the Zohar, and then so there's a whole entire war about it. And in response to this, Klaus used the Zohar to reset the universe, and therefore Earth was quote-unquote lost, because in episode 1 the whole war took place and the Earth was lost. And the context of Xenoblade, the Earth being lost, is basically just Klaus resetting the universe. So I guess you could consider it lost in that sense. And then episode 2 would be... So before I continue, right now I'm going through basically all of Xenoblade 2 and how the Perfect Works timeline plays out in Xenoblade 2. I will mention Xenoblade 1 and kind of X after I finish with 2. So episode 2 of Perfect Works is basically new life on a new world, and in the context of Xenoblade 2, this could be after Klaus resetted the universe and he created the Titans in the whole blade system to basically restart life on Earth, and he just basically just sat there and oversaw everything as humanity progressed to where it is in current Xenoblade 2 time. Now, Xenoblade, or episode 3, is about an ancient civilization per se, and the one that makes most sense in terms of Xenoblade 2 is Judicium. Now, Judicium is a long lost advanced civilization, and they are more advanced than even Indal is. So, I mean, we know almost nothing about them. We know very little bit, but we do know that they were very advanced, and they were even surpassed Indal in certain things. So Judicium could be this third ancient civilization for episode 3. Episode 4 is, in the best way, a tragic villain's origins. So basically, the origins and this backstory of the villains. I think in Xenosaga it was I forgot their name, but I mean, I'll have their name up on screen. It's basically their backstory, and in terms of Xenoblade 2, this fits almost perfectly with Torna telling the backstory of Jin and how he basically changed sides and went from a hero and a protagonist to an antagonist and wanting to basically just destroy all of humanity and Klaus the architect. And episode 5 is when Xenoblade 2 takes place, and in the original timeline is when Xenogears takes place. Episode 5 is basically the Zohar departing, and we know Xenoblade 2, the Zohar departs after defeating Ion. Well, that's not the reason why the Zohar departs, I will get into that in a second. But the Zohar departs after defeating Ion, and Klaus fades away along with it, or the Zohar fades away along with Klaus during his death. Now for the Xenoblade 1 side of Perfect Works, it's basically the same up until the reset of the universe with the Samurai rebels fighting for the Zohar and everything. And then we know that when Klaus used the Zohar to reset the universe, it created the Xenoblade 1 pocket dimension. Now the life on a new world for Xenoblade 1 could be Maynith and Zanza creating the Bionis and Mechonis, you know, for everyone to live on. And episode 3 for Xenoblade 1 could be the Machina or even the giants on Bionis, because we know how advanced the Machina are. And for example, Lanata was able to basically, actually no, let me not say that, because that's, I always forget to put a spoiler warning in here, but I'll have it up at the beginning of the video. But Lanata was able to basically revive Fiora and fit her with a Mechon body. So I mean, the Machina are like insane with just all the shit they can do. And like, look, they even built face Mechons and everything. Like, they really are that advanced. But the giants could also be like the Bionis equivalent of the Machina. I don't know. You don't know much about the giants. But for the advanced civilization, it could be the giants and or Machina. Episode 4, we don't really have an episode 4 of Xenoblade 1. At least like we don't have like an arc for it or a separate game. But if there were an episode 4 for Xenoblade 1, it would probably be like a Torna type thing, but for Egil, describing Egil's backstory and how he came to be how he is and why he hates Zanza. Okay, I guess it's described a little bit in the game. When it talks about how the Bionis and Mechonis lived in harmony, and then Arglist found the Monado, and when he picked up the Monado, Zanza inhabited Arglist, and then as Arglist, Zanza basically used the Monado to strike at the Mechonis, therefore leading to Egil's hate for Zanza, and therefore wanting to take out Zanza. And the best way to do that is starvation tactics, where he would basically kill all life on the Bionis to prevent all the life on Bionis from returning to the Bionis, and therefore feeding Zanza and keeping him alive. If you were to starve Zanza of basically his nutrients, then Zanza wouldn't be able to basically just rejuvenate himself. Episode 5 is obviously Xenoblade 1, and the Zohar departing obviously happens in the Xenoblade 2 side of this, and the cause of the Zohar departing is Shulk killing Zanza, which is Klaus's second half. So when Zanza dies, Klaus also dies, and therefore the Zohar leaves when Zanza dies. Now, the part this video is all about, episode 6. We know almost literally nothing about episode 6, except for that it is basically like fighting to keep the universe from ending. It's basically the end of the universe and fighting to keep it from collapsing. Episode 6 takes place almost immediately after episode 5, and in terms of this timeline, everything's happening like thousands of years apart. So in terms of Xenoblade 2 or Xenoblade in general, Xenoblade 3 takes place a couple hundred years after Xenoblade 1 and 2. That's not a big gap compared to thousands. So it's safe to assume, at least in that sense, that Xenoblade 3 is episode 6. And not only that, but we know the main theme of Xenoblade 3 is life and death, especially when Noah says this:
fighting in order to live, and living to fight. That's the way of our world. Ionios.
Fighting in order to live and living to fight. Basically, Kevis and Agnes, everyone is fighting, fighting in order to live and living to fight. They have to fight in order to keep the collective unconscious together. And now the collective unconscious is actually something from Xenosaga, and in order to understand that, I have to kind of explain how the Xenosaga universe works. In the Xenosaga, there is the upper domain and the lower domain. The lower domain has basically two sections: the real number domain and the imaginary number domain. The real number domain is where everything exists, so like you, me, or in terms of Xenosaga, like Shion, everybody, like the world, everything that exists in both the real number domain and the imaginary number domain. So like all the tangible and like perceivable reality is the real number domain. The Gnosis, however, exists in the imaginary number domain, where they can't be harmed or interacted with at all by humans, but they could still kill humans and all that. It's confusing. But after people in the real number domain die, their consciousness go up into the imaginary number domain, into what is called the collective unconscious. So without like a physical body, their consciousness just merges into one, the collective unconscious, the undus mundus, which the collective unconscious resides in. And basically, when someone rejects forming and becoming part of this collective unconscious and rejecting being as one, this unification, they become a gnosis. That's how gnosis are basically made, is when the conscious of someone rejects unifying. And every time this happens, it weakens the collective unconscious more and more, and the collective unconscious basically like holds everything together. And the lower domain is at risk of collapsing if the collective unconscious collapses. Now, before I continue on with that, I have to explain the upper domain. In Xenosaga, the upper domain is basically, no one knows about the upper domain at all. Like, everyone in the lower domain they have no knowledge of the upper domain. Upper domain is where Udu and Udu-like beings reside. There are multiple upper domains with their own lower domains, but for the Xenosaga universe, for that lower domain, the upper domain is where Udu resides, and Udu can be seen as sort of God, for lack of a better term. Alright, this is me in post-production. I had forgotten in cutscene for Xenoblade 2, Klaus says this.
This is my punishment. Retribution from on high for the sin I have committed.
And this, he could actually be referring to Udu or some type of Udu-like being, since Xenoblade 2, as we know it, could be the lower domain and there could be an upper domain connected to it with Udu or some other type of wave existence. And that's where the Zohar or conduit could have come from. But back to the actual. And the upper domain and the lower domain have no control over the other. They coincide with each other. And for the lower domain, it's kind of like two sides of the same coin. With the imaginary and real number domain, they both depend on each other, and if one collapses, then the other. Same with the lower and upper domains. If one collapses, then so does the other. So if anything goes wrong anywhere inside either upper domain or lower domain, the entire universe is destroyed. So the collective unconscious weakening every time a gnosis is created will eventually not be able to hold itself together and basically rupture, creating an entire destruction of the universe. Now, in terms of Xenoblade, at the end of FC, or basically the entirety of FC, Future Connected, the Fog King is basically like Xenoblade's version of a Gnosis. He basically is a Gnosis. He kind of comes out of nowhere. He resides in his own domain that he can't be interacted with. When the party first fight him, they can't touch him or anything until Shulk creates his own version of the Hilbert effect. And in Xenosaga, the Hilbert effect is basically a tool created to draw the Gnosis into the real number domain. And it's kind of the whole point of Cosmos, is she's a battle android equipped with the Hilbert effect in order to fight the Gnosis. And once the Gnosis are drawn into the real number domain by the Hilbert effect, they're able to be, they're just like everyone else, they're able to be harmed. So after Shulk creates his own Hilbert effect, they're able to fight off the Fog King. And this Fog King can be like the first Gnosis in the Xenoblade 1, or the Xenoblade universe, and could be like the first sign of a collective unconscious breaking apart. And since Xenoblade 3 takes place what I assume like a couple hundred years after. It's safe to assume that it takes place a couple hundred years after Xenoblade 1 and 2. The collective unconscious could be weakening more and more, and the people of Kevis and Agnes are having to fight to fill up the clocks in order to keep the collective unconscious of the imaginary number domain together. And the version of doing this could be playing the flutes to basically return the physical bodies to ether, as well as the consciousness, and return that to into the collective unconscious. And this could be like the equivalent to the Hom's way of returning life to the Bionis. And we don't exactly know what that is, but they seem to have their own like little sacred ritual for returning life to the Bionis. This could be similar for Xenoblade 3 with playing the flutes. Like the certain tune has some kind of sacred power or such, and all the life is like the deceased life is returned up into the imaginary number domain in the collective unconscious. So, and without these offseers returning the life to the collective unconscious will just get weaker and weaker as more gnosis and basically fog beasts are created, eventually resulting in the destruction of the universe. So Xenoblade 3 could be about fighting to keep the universe together, basically fighting to keep this collective unconscious together, and trying to find some way to stop Gnosis from materializing and being created in order to make sure the universe is not destroyed. This seems to be what an episode 6 would look like for Xenogears. Obviously it'd be different, but keeping the universe from collapsing in on itself. This is basically the Xenoblade equivalent of it. As a recap, actually I didn't even go over Xenoblade X. See, Xenoblade X is weird because it doesn't really fit in with the Xenoblade 1 and 2 all that well. And basically all we have, Xenoblade 1 or Xenoblade X, is basically just before episode 1. Everything that happens or takes place in Xenoblade X actually is episode 2. Everything that happens in Xenoblade X is up to episode 2 in perfect work. So the Zohar is not anywhere in Xenoblade X, but Elma could be the equivalent of the Zohar, considering how important she is to the story and just how she functions as a character. And then episode 1, Interplanetary War, is obviously the opening we see in Xenoblade X when the aliens and the ghosts and I think Samarians are fighting above Earth, and that's when Earth is destroyed. Samarians are long dead. I think Samarians could be the advanced civilization for episode 3, but we don't have like a game on that or anything. But they could be the advanced civilization if an episode 3 did happen for X. But the interplanetary war is basically just the fight above Earth in Xenoblade X, just like how the Saviorite Rebel War in Xenoblade 2. And then episode 2, Life on a New World, goddamn, is obviously them crash landing on Mira and basically cultivating the planet and just adapting to life on Mira. We don't have an episode 4 or 5, and definitely not a 6. But yeah, everything Gears Saga and Xenoblade, they all fit into like this whole perfect works type story. Obviously only Xenogears is like the original story, and then Saga and Blade take on their own renditions of that story. But basically, to recap, the Zohar was found in Kenya, Africa in the 21st century, which led to advancements in technology and led up to episode 1, which is the Interplanetary War, which is the Saviorite War, which led up to Klaus using the Zohar to reset the universe. And causing Earth to be lost. Episode 2, Life on a New World, is the creation of the Titans and Blade system in Xenoblade 2, and then the Titans, Mechonis and Bionis in Xenoblade 1. Episode 3, Advanced Civilization, Judicium for Xenoblade 2, and then for Xenoblade 1 could be the Giants and Machina. Episode 4, Tragic Villain's Origin, obviously Torna with Jin's backstory, and then some type of like story for Egil and his come up. Episode 5, Zohar departing, is the events of Xenoblade 2 and Xenoblade 1 respectively as they happen in the game. And then episode 6 is the merging of Xenoblade 1 and 2 into Xenoblade 3, and that's when everyone is fighting in order to basically keep the collective unconscious together, preventing the universe from being destroyed. Okay, this video was kind of messy and all over the place. I basically just explained everything from memory, like I didn't have any notes or anything. I guess I had like a little spread chart from Luxon's video that I looked at for like references, but other than that, I kind of basically just went off the dome and everything was just from memory. So this seems like all over the place and confusing. I apologize for that. I will be linking the Rudra video and the Luxon video in the description, so y'all can go watch those for a more in-depth and better organized explanation of this. But yeah, I do believe that Xenoblade 3 is finally the episode 6 of Perfect Works that we haven't gotten yet and that we know almost nothing about. So obviously Xenoblade 3 will be more sophisticated than what I had explained in this video, but that's kind of just like a surface level of what the story could be about. So I actually really like this theory a lot, and I'm excited to see where it goes. Obviously I haven't finished playing Xenosaga and I haven't even touched Gears yet, so I'm excited to like play the entire series and finally learn like the whole story of each of the 3, Gears, Saga, and Blade, and just like story of the whole thing. But I really do love the Xeno series. It is my favorite series of all time, my favorite game series of all time, with Xenoblade being, you know, my favorite out of the 3. But yeah, I really do need to beat Saga and start Gears so I can just learn everything and just take all of it in. I'm really excited for this video, if you can't tell by me stumbling over my words. But I don't know if I forgot to mention anything here. I probably did. I'm probably going to remember something as soon as I upload this video and then hate myself for it. But as of now, I kind of said everything I wanted to say. Albeit, I could have explained it better, and Luxon and Rudra explain it better than I did here. So go check them out. And still, Xenobits link a lot. Temmie J and Prez, go support them as well. I didn't forget. But yeah, I really hope y'all enjoyed this video, and I have quite a bit more videos coming. I have quite a decent amount of ideas for future videos, so I'm hoping those will do well as well. But yeah, that's really about it. So as always, thanks for watching. Have a damn good day. Stay safe. Be well. And play some goddamn Xenoblade.